Well, hello there. I'm Kimberly Hayes Muka,
And I'm Amanda Day,
and you're listening to the Fundraising Heyday podcast
where we cover the how-tos of grants and fundraising.
and how we can all do a better job of positively changing the world.
Yes, so thanks for joining us today. If you're a new listener, welcome to the show and welcome back to our returning listeners. Kimberly and I have been working together on the Fundraising Heyday podcast since 2018, and that has led us to branch out into developing co-led training that we wish we had back when we started, back in time. Yeah, we're talking early aughts. We're talking maybe the 90s. Yeah.
Oh, for the 90s for your girl. Yes, I'm not ashamed. I am what I am. It was back in the day.
Back in the day. But back when we first started writing grants, there wasn't a whole lot of training opportunities. There were a few things out there here and there, but most of it was trial by fire because you just had to figure out and move on. And so what we have created is the grant training we wish we had
Yep.
back in the day, but we're offering it now. We're calling it the Grants Lab, and we're debuting our first cohort in the fall of 2024. It's a great mix of education and coaching. There's going to be hands-on writing exercises. You'll get feedback from us, and together this, cohort is going to give your agency an edge in developing winning grant proposals. And so this is something certainly for new grant professionals, new-ish grant professionals. Even if you've been doing it a while and are wanting to brush up on some of your skills, I think the Grants Lab could be the great place to do that as well. So if you want to learn more about it, visit our website, heydayservices.com. That's HAYDAY services.com. And just click on the training tab at the top of the page.
And we're keeping the cohorts small, like between a minimum of 3 and a maximum of just 10 agencies. We want to help build community, but we also want to make sure that whether you are coming to this fresh and frightened because someone said, hey, you read a lot, you can write grants for us now, or whether you've been in it for a while and want to brush up, wherever you are, or maybe you are bringing someone new, maybe a grant writer who might have 1 or 2 years of experience, and you want to bring them up to speed. You want to have some really excellent professional development. It's all good. Grants Lab is all good for that.
Yeah. Well, and I'd say too, you said agencies. And so we're talking, it's a price per agency. So you may have a grants team of 3 people, of 8 people, of 12 people, and you're like, I don't have a grants team. Sure, you do. You have someone in accounting that probably helps with things. You may have a program director that you work with a lot. You may have an executive director that's very hands-on. Whatever your grants team is, that is your agency. We're looking to help train your entire agency so everybody understands the whole process.
This is true. This is
Yeah.
true. And today we are going to discuss a little slice of grant learning paradise that you will get a lot more of in the Grants Lab. And remember, you can find out about the Grants Lab by going to heydayservices.com. Okay. But today we are going to dive into the beautiful, wonderful, and Amanda's absolutely favorite world of logic models.
Oh.
Yay! So we are absolutely thrilled that SNF Writing Solutions is our podcast sponsor for the second half of 2024, season 7, if you can believe it. Founder and CEO Stacey Fitzsimmons, a self-proclaimed data geek, is a seasoned grant pro who's raised and managed hundreds of millions of dollars. She's a certified compression planner, and she has broad management experience across a lot of different industries like restaurants, retail, technology, healthcare, nonprofits, the arts, and state government. She is sharing her decades of experience bit by bit with us, so take a listen. So in our last episode with Stacey, we learned that sadly the decision matrix has nothing to do with Keanu Reeves. But what we'd like to explore is how can a decision matrix, how can it speed up just good, solid planning?
Well, it depends if you're going to take the red pill or the blue pill. Um,
Hmm.
hmm. So if you're going to go down the rabbit hole, then it can really speed up your decision process because it's not taking weeks to get to that are we doing it or not decision.
Mm.
Okay. You're going to have a set process that you make these decisions for. Okay. And I'm using the go no go example because it's the most probably near and dear to all of our hearts, but you can use it for any kind of decision that you have to make. But really, when it comes down to it, you can have a decision in 48 to 72 hours, depending on how long you give people to evaluate an opportunity. You're going to have a standard decision matrix that you're going to use for every opportunity. So it's a reuse every time type situation. And then you give people 2 days to review it. You already put a calendar appointment on there for the third day that you're going to all come back and look at the scores. You have some homework to do in between there, but really you can have a decision in 3 days. And I know for a lot of us, that's a lot of time back to write the proposal or to pursue something else if it ends up being a no.
True.
To find out more about Stacy Fitzsimmons and her incredible team at SNF Writing Solutions, visit snfwritingsolutions.com. If you want the tools and resources to up your organization's grant game, check out their services provided page and reach out to them today.
So, so when we're thinking about logic models, when I'm thinking about logic models, let's just start there. If I were having to describe this and the proverbial elevator pitch, I'd say it's a chart or it's a kind of a table that lets you outline your entire program at a glance, the key critical components of the program and what you want to achieve. That's basically what it is. It takes many there are little variations, but generally it's a table, right? It's like a table chart um, that is really often required in a lot of program funding at the state and federal level. Not so much for equipment or necessarily grant renewals, but also in larger private applications, right? Like many United Ways use a version of the logic model. Larger community foundations might use a version of it. When I first started writing grants back in another century when things were different, things really weren't that different. It's just the technology of writing grants has changed, but logic models were there. I came at grant writing as a writer, and so I was like, this form, what? Come on, I know why do I'm writing about it in the program description. What's up with that? So as an employee and someone who was fortunate enough to have access to program folks and finance folks who could give me the data I was looking for, I just saw it at that time as a sort of a necessary evil. Like, all
Mhm.
right, you want me to fill out another form, I'm gonna fill it out, whatever. As I got more experience and started working with larger agencies or agencies that were growing and expanding, it actually was a really useful way of it's almost like the Spark Notes version of trying to build a program, right?
Mhm.
So now I think it's incredibly useful for working with clients where I'm not there every day, regardless of whether or not it's required in a proposal necessarily. I can use and do use a form of logic model, and I call it something different because logic model, the name is scary, right? I call it something a little bit different, but I just say, hey, this is our program outline. I'm using air quotes, and let's just fill this out together, and we're going to go through the components of it, but I just wanted to say it's a way for me to kind of coax out program details, particularly if I'm working with people who are in agencies that they don't normally work a lot with grants, or it's a brand new program or they're expanding an old program and they just need a refresh. Filling out blanks on a chart seems to be, for most folks, a little less intimidating than creating bullet points or creating a budget. Those things will have to happen, but at least if there's an outline of the program components and expected outcomes that's in a logic model, it just makes it easier to maybe bring people together. It can also point out some deficiencies. So anyway, it's not perfect, but I'm really on team logic model around program design. But I bet Amanda feels differently about this.
I do. And I think the big reason I feel differently about logic models is I didn't have to do them for so long, right? So, like I said, I kind of figured things out on my own, didn't have a whole lot of training to begin with. And writing grants in local government, especially the types of grants I was writing, right? I'm doing transportation, parks and recreation, equipment for public safety, things like that. Those funders I was going after grants for never asked for a logic model. So for like the first 15 years of my career, I never wrote one because I never had to, because no one ever asked me to. And it wasn't until I started going to things like the Grant Professional Association conference that I even started hearing about logic models. I'm like, what is this thing you speak of? I've not heard of it. And so people are telling me. So of course I'm looking at it from a perspective of I've never needed it. I've always done it without it. And now it's just, I'm like, to me, I'm like, that's just that extra form I've got to do because I had my process and it works for me. So that's why I am not a big fan of them. However, I do
Hmm.
understand their purpose. I do think it can definitely be a great tool to help you get your ducks in a row, to help get the information you need. And when I'm asked to do it, I will happily do it and put it together. And I
Happily,
will happily.
really
I'm
happily.
a happy person. I'll do it. But I just assume not do it. So, and again, I know some people are like, oh my gosh, it's such a great tool. I'm not arguing with that. It's just, I've never needed it. And so I'm just as happy to not do it. How's that? But whether you love them or hate them,
Yep.
they're often required in certain grants. A lot, like Kimberly mentioned, a lot of United Ways and a lot of larger foundation grants. A lot of, if you're doing grants related to education, health
Mhm.
related grants, oftentimes have that. So really, again, you may be like me and be like, all I do is write public safety grants. Okay, you may never have to write a logic model in your life, and that's fine. But if you're doing a lot of different grants, or if you're in one of those areas that required a lot, then you're gonna have to figure it out, right? So
Or
that's
if you're in public safety and you want to expand out a role of community policing
Mhm.
and you want to have some seasoned licensed social workers working in tandem with your officers,
Yeah,
you
that's
probably
true.
will need to. I mean, do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it could come up if you veer if you're moving into more program areas, no matter where
More
you are. I'm
health
just
related.
saying.
Yeah, that's
Just
true.
saying.
Very true. Yep. So to help you out, whether you've done it a million times before, or you're new to it, or you're just wondering what the heck is this thing you speak of? What are these logic models? We're going to define the basic components and give you some examples to help as you go.
And we're going to have some links in our show notes
Yes.
and some posts that we're going to do around this episode that'll connect you with some really good, reliable, trustworthy, free resources that can
Hmm.
help you out with this too. Because we're talking about a form, and even if you're watching us on YouTube instead of like listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or on our website, yet we're not holding up examples of logic models, and there's a reason why. uh, well, also, if you're listening, you wouldn't see it if we held it up
Yeah,
anyway.
would be helpful to our podcast audience.
But the other reason is that they're just like grant applications. There's no one standard. This is a logic model heretofore, or whatever the appropriate legalese would be. This we're going to be using this form for everyone in the future for all grants until the end of time. That's really not how it's working. It's never worked that way. So what we want to do is walk you through the most common components and their most commonly used names.
Yeah.
So if you're driving, please do not close your eyes. But if you're listening at home or in the office, if you can just sort of close your eyes and think of, it's a chart with columns, right? Columns and rows. Maybe it looks like a little bit like a spreadsheet or just a simple table in Word. we want to walk you through the key components of this so that when you look at it in the future, or you're trying to explain it to someone if you're already familiar with logic models, sometimes dropping back down into basic language and analogies when you're working with a program director or manager who's never seen a logic model before. Sometimes just backing it up to the basics can really help you. A fast caveat, or not a caveat, a fast recommendation. Logic models, even if they're not required, are something that I have found in the healthcare sector. A lot of providers and nurses and other medical professionals, it's a chart thing that seems to just sort of resonate. I was struggling to use it with a lieutenant in a local police force. We were getting nowhere fast. I had to change and adapt and move it around. But depending on the training of the people that you're working on, I also imagine, Amanda, if you had to use logic models in Alpharetta, you were using them maybe with engineers.
Mhm.
It might be a better fit.
Yeah, how
So
their brain
again, it's
works. Yep.
not a one size fits all. So anyway, so Amanda, I know you're going to start us off.
Yep. So the first step, or maybe the first column, often in a logic model, that you want to identify is your resources, or it could be called your inputs. And basically, these are just all the things that you have at your disposal to implement your project or your program, right? So think about, you've got humans, you have financial resources, you could have material resources. It's just everything that you're dedicating towards your project. So I've got a great example. I've mentioned many times before, I work with it's called the Physicians Care Clinic that they do after they do, it's a free clinic for folks who do not have access to health insurance. And so if I was doing a logic model for them, talking about our diabetes education program that is done through the clinic and some other things, I would, on my resources list, I would include all the doctors that volunteer at our clinic. I would include the pharmacists and other people that volunteer at the clinic. I might include in-kind donations we have. So we have different agencies that provide lab work, that provide medical prescriptions, things like that. Because, again, if people are coming and think they have diabetes, we're going to be testing them. If they are, there's going to be medication involved. I may include other things that we may have to purchase as part of our program. So part of the diabetes education program, we do education. We have a nutritionist come in and teach them how to eat better and about exercise. The local hospital has like a gym you can get a membership to. So sometimes we'll buy memberships for that. We're going to need supplies. We provide supplies to our patients, right? So they get glucose monitors and different things like that. So all of these are going to be the tools at our resource to be able to implement our program. So we couldn't do it without people, without money, without things. And so
Oh,
that's the kind of stuff you'll list.
and partner agencies, like
Yes.
if they have a partnership with the county public health department or the
Yeah, which they
hospital
do. Yeah.
itself. Yeah.
Hmm. You
Those
can list
those are
them.
resources, those
Yep.
are assets, those are tools to get the program done. Yeah.
Yep.
So Amanda talked about sort of the assets, the tools, the resources. That's typically called a resource or inputs column. And so next to that is a column that is most commonly called activities.
Hmm.
And there are other columns that have words that have titles that can kind of be confusing. And we'll get to that, like outputs and outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. But resources is what you need to do the thing. And then activities are the things that you need to do the thing, right? They're the
Yeah.
actual, it's not the way you're going to evaluate it. It's not in the future, more kids will be able to read at grade level. No, it's what are you going to do, for example, to help the kids read at that grade level? So maybe there's tutoring, maybe there's learning software, there are games, there are classroom activities, there are learning plans developed with the partner schools, whatever that may be. Those activities, those things, the meetings with the teachers, the tutoring sessions, the learning lab, whatever it is, those are the activities, the things that are actually going to happen. Um, I would also recommend when you're filling out, whether you're being forced to Amanda Day style, or whether you're like trying to use it as a planning tool to help people get to the sort of the basics, the critical elements of their programs. Because once you do that, once you know what it is that you're wanting to do and what it's going to achieve, and also what you need to make it happen, then you can begin to assign dollar amounts and staffing and other things that would kind of go in to your overall grant proposal. So it's a great, for me, I find it a great starting tool. I think it's important when we're thinking about activities, to think of it, maybe it's kind of like getting GPS directions to get somewhere. It's like you're turning here, you're turning there, you're turning here. You're not, this trip will change my life because I'm going to see something beautiful, or this trip will change my life because I'm going to see a beloved friend I haven't seen in 30 years, and it's going to be great. And the outcome is that we're going to be closer together because of it. No, the activities are, I'm going to get on 85 and I'm going to go north, and then I'm going to turn right uh, in South Carolina and go across the country, whatever it is that you're going to do. It's sort of just the twists and turns of the journey, not summarizing the journey itself.
Yeah. Well, and a good logic model pairs very beautifully with your grant application. And if you're thinking about components of your grant application, somewhere in the application, they usually say something like, tell us about your program. What are you going to do? Well, that's exactly what Kimberly's talking about here in activities. What are you going to do? What is your program? What are you doing? So that's a good way to think of it too. So well, next up after activities, a typical logic model usually has listed next are the outputs. Okay. And so the way to think about this, because like Kimberly says, you have outputs, and later on we're going to talk about outcomes, and they can sometimes be confused, and different people may say different things. In terms of the logic model and what we're talking about here for the basics, outputs are basically these are the things that are the direct result of your activities. So what are you creating as a result of the work that you're doing? Okay. So if you are, let's go back to my physician's care clinic. So we are going to, I talked about we've got doctors and we've got tools and we've got resources. And then the activities may have been we're doing a clinic twice a week, and we are going to test people for diabetes, and we're going to get their results, and we're going to send people to education, and we're going to do this. So as a result of that, I could probably quantify a bunch of things, right? Like how many clinics are we hosting over the course of the program? How many people are we serving as a result of that? How many labs did we run? What percentage of the people are diagnosed with diabetes? How many prescriptions did we fill? How many education classes did we hold? How many people made use of their gym passes, and how many times did they work out? These are just lots of examples of things that are happening as a result. And we're not talking about change. I'm not saying that, that 30% of the people with diabetes now have X, Y, and Z. Just how many people have diabetes? How many people were tested? How many people got prescriptions? How many people got the supplies? You're kind of counting things when it comes to outputs.
So you've outlined your activities in the activities column.
Yes.
And here you're like, here's some things that we're going to measure, kind of immediate things.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like you're making sure that the program is going to be delivered in the way it was designed by this list of things.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that you can see what the difference between activities and outputs. The activities are the things the program is going to do, and then the activities are the things, the activities compose the program itself. We're backing up to listing out the inputs, what you need to do the things. The things are the activities, and the outputs are the tracking how you're doing the things.
Yeah.
That's kind of, in very few syllables, that's kind of the way that
well, think about it, because it's helpful to know. It's one thing to say, hey, we're gonna hold clinics and we're gonna serve people. These are activities. now you're quantifying that, right? So like, okay, well, how many clinics, how many people, how many prescriptions, how many this, how many that. So outputs, if you can think of quantifying what you're doing.
Quantifying the activities,
Yeah.
which, depending on the grant proposal you're working on, that could constitute the bulk of your program description, right?
No,
Now, a lot of
absolutely.
times grant proposals are going to be like, well, why are you choosing to do this program? Is this an evidence-based model? Are you replicating something in another town or city or organization? I get all that. But like the nuts and bolts of your program, it's like, these are the things we're going to do, and this is how we are how we know
Yeah.
we're doing those things.
Mm-hmm.
It could also help you when you move into evaluation, but the bulk of that is really in the last couple of columns. Sometimes it's two, sometimes it's three, in logic models where they're talking about outcomes. And you
Yeah.
may be going, well, Kimberly, that sounds a whole lot like outputs. And I'm like, yeah, it does. And I don't know why you would choose two columns that sound very close together, outputs and outcomes, and can be so easily confused. But no one asked me. But I'm telling you, I think it's
What it is.
wrong.
Yeah.
But that's the accepted terminology, so that's what we're going to go for. Um, Sometimes in logic models, as I said, there could be two or three columns where they're like um, outcomes that are short term, intermediate, long term.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and those are a little bit more self-explanatory, but I would in explaining outcomes, I would say the outcomes on a logic model are the cousins of the objectives that you will have to write in the rest of the grant proposal. Like they're like first cousins.
Yeah.
Um,
They hang out a lot.
they hang out a lot. And so it's gonna, again, they're going to be, it's the change, whether it's short term, um, intermediate, or long term change that you would expect to see if you took all your resources, you took all your activities, and you were tracking how the program was delivered according to like just the activities. Then you're moving into what are some short, intermediate, and long term changes that might occur. And in the short term, it just might be that there were 40, there's an average of 40 prescriptions for different diabetic medications filled in a week. I'm just winging it here. That could be the short term, is that people have access to the prescription drugs that they need, right? Medium could be they're taking some other measures. Maybe they're taking part in different classes over a series of months, or maybe they're working with a case manager around some barriers that are like the social determinants to health, whatever it is. And long term would be, after completing this program or by the time of their next checkup, here are some things that hopefully are positive that happen. So again, it's not we've done the entire project and here are our findings, and in this peer-reviewed journal article, although that could happen in larger programs. But what we're talking about is sort of dissecting out what are the changes that we are the benefits, the positive benefits that should come from all these things coming together and being delivered in the same way. So again, you just have that on one page. And where it gets ouchy sometimes is that people don't want to think about that. And I get it, but I'm also like, a lot of times people don't want to think about objectives. I've had, when teaching classes before, I'd have people say who were not familiar with grants, they're like, well, I can't predict the future. I can't do objectives. And it's like, right. You can't predict if you have a mortgage that you're going to be able to pay off your house, but you and the bank together have come up with a plan, and
Yeah.
there's a series of systems and measurements and timely payments that, based on the information at hand, they feel like you're a good risk and you feel like you can do it, because hopefully you're thinking about that deeply, because what a huge commitment. Or signing a lease for an apartment, or buying a car. I mean, these are all decisions predicated on here are the facts at hand. We're going to take a calculated risk. So if you're getting pushback from people who are like, well, we just can't do objectives because we don't know the future, then they may not be ready to go for grants. And that's okay too.
Yeah.
But maybe explaining this is not an opt-out kind of thing. If you're writing a grant that requires, if you're like the project manager of a grant that requires a logic model or objectives, there's not a negotiation point with the funder where it's like, hey, this is an awful lot of paperwork. Can you like dial this back? Now, there are ways for collective action to talk to funders and go, can you just stop with all the paperwork? But if the grant is due in 2 weeks, that's not the time. And you can say that you're not going to fill things out, but then you're probably going to be disqualified. So,
Yep. Well, I've even seen some logic models that have at the front, like before you even get into all of these pieces we've talked about, will have some assumptions where you're writing, all of this is predicated on these things that we know. So this is kind of what she's talking about. Like there's just some things like you kind of know what, people who choose to like for the diabetes things, if you choose to follow what we're recommending with your diet and your exercise and your medicine and you continue to monitor and you do the things you're supposed to do, chances are you're going to be healthier, right? Chances are your A1C levels are going to be lower. Chances are. So you can have some assumptions that's kind of your framework that you're working from to create the basis of the program and the outcomes and the outputs and all those things. So, and then another thing that is often included, usually it's the very far right column, is kind of the overall impact or the overall goal of your program.
we mean in where it's located on the page.
Yes.
We are casting no political
This
aspersions.
is true. We're just talking about page, left, right,
Yep.
up, down.
Yep.
But this is it should include this impact or the goal that you're aiming to achieve. Usually it's broad, it's long term. It may be very lofty, right? We always talk about when we talk about goals and objectives, your objectives need to be those very specific things you're hoping to achieve, but goals can be these lofty things that we hope to get there one day, right? So, it may be, for my example, that it's that our diabetic patients live
Yep.
long, healthy, happy lives. That's the impact that they're around. They get to, you know, see their kids grow up if that's their aim, or they get to go climb Mount Everest if that's their goal, or they get to whatever it is, right? They get to live this
Or they
long,
get to
happy life.
have all their fingers and all their toes
Yes.
because they can walk. I mean, these
Yeah.
are
Sure.
quality of life,
Quality of life. That's what it is. Yep. So.
So a quick note for the nerdy among us, and I certainly count myself in that bunch. Welcome. Um, if you're wondering where do these logic models even come from, what is going on with this? They've actually been used for several decades, but started as a program planning tool, right? Not necessarily connected to grants. Um, the I think like back in the 70s and 80s, in public health in particular and community development, they were developed to help visually map out a program, which kind of ties into the belabored GPS metaphor I used a few minutes ago, to map out the program in a theoretical type of framework and look at the results. So that's really, so again, it wasn't developed specifically to torment grant writers, although I can see how that can happen very easily.
It can feel like that.
It can feel like that. But that's not, it
Yeah.
wasn't, the primary purpose of this wasn't necessarily for proposals for grants at all.
Yep. Major government agencies like the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, also known as the CDC, and the W.K. Kellogg Foundation were very early promoters of using logic models for program design and evaluation. In fact, if you Google the Kellogg Foundation logic model, they've got a great resource, and we'll include it in our show notes for you as well. But it's a link to a document that really breaks down. I want to say it's like a 78-page document, but it has tons, and don't let that overwhelm you because it has tons of examples, different charts and graphs, and it defines all of these, the outputs and the outcomes. And it's something I often, if I do have to write a logic model and I'm forgetting, wait, what's the difference? The Kellogg Foundation, towards the very front, they have those definitions, and that really helps me ground, okay, this is what goes here, this is what goes there. And so it's just really a great tool. As accountability and performance measurements became bigger priorities for government and foundation grants over probably starting in the 90s, logic models were seen as a useful tool to help with proposals. So that brings us to today, right?
And we don't know who saw them and who thought it was a good idea, okay? Because again, we might have something to share about that, Amanda, I think.
You think so?
Yeah.
Well, I do know folks can take like if you're in a master's level program, I've known some people that are like, I had to take a class on logic models. So it's, I think it
Like
is.
public administration or things like
Yes.
that. Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep. It is around. It's here to stay. So um, I think they probably are here to stay for us as grant folks too.
And I can hear the excitement and energy in your voice in that. So I would say if you're moving, especially if you're moving in program areas that need grant funding, right? If your primary focus is like DOT, there are plenty of other forms. There are just plenty of other exciting things that may not touch on logic models, but there's plenty of documentation there. But if you're looking at programs and projects, particularly education, health and human services, and all that can cover, um, logic models could be even if they're not required, I still maintain they could be a really useful tool for bringing folks together, the finance, the program people, for bringing folks together around um, the common goal of let's look at this. What is it that we need? What are the changes that are going to come? So I would argue that they're useful tools.
Yeah, and I don't disagree that they are, but I'm still the camp of if I don't have to do it, I don't do it. And if that's how you operate, nothing wrong with that. But if you love them, that's great too. I know most of the grant professionals I know love them, and I'm happy for them that they love them.
She's so happy.
Happy person. Thanks again to today's sponsor, SNF Writing Solutions. If you want to learn more about all that Stacy and her team offer in terms of resources, coaching, grant writing, and more, visit snfwritingsolutions.com.
So, logic models are great ways to guide program design and description, even if they're not mandatory parts of grant applications. Either way, they can be really useful tools, especially for new or expanding programs and projects.
Yep. So we're so honored you chose to spend time with us today. We hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks. We are going to talk about that issue that continues to hurt the world of nonprofits, including its employees. And what am I talking about? Like there needs to be a dun dun dun. Talking about the overhead myth.
That's right.
See you then.
Bye.